Hello and welcome to Edge Talk Radio. My name is Angela Zabel. That's me. So today we're going to be talking about burnout to clear skies, the Aurora Method, with author Tracy Doyle from New Jersey. So who am I? I am Angela Zabel. I have been connected to spirit working with the team in the non-physical my entire life, sharing messages with a multitude of realms with people. I am a teacher, coach, medium, radio show host, writer, retreat host, gallery reader, doing speaking engagements and offering guidance, mediumship, intuition, and the online and with also online and private group sessions and classes and the Amplified Universe monthly membership. This is a group growing our connection to us, our world, all that is around us, and what we can do to help our role in the world. We are also sharing knowledge with others, working with people throughout the world. And you can find me pretty much anywhere. Go to my website, angelazabel.com, and then check out all my social media from there. And today we are here. I'm going to try to get this in thing here. So we are here with Edge Magazine. Edge Magazine is the leading events and media resource dedicated to all aspects of holistic living, health, wellness, and the mysteries beyond, sharing information, wisdom, and resources, committed to promoting our collective journey to wholeness and balance for businesses, organizations, and individuals. They're currently distributed in 30 states and Canada with a whole 17,000 magazines per printing. It also has a vibrant online magazine with over 42,000 people reached per month. You can have the magazine shipped to your door, stay up to date with their newsletter, become a drop spot if you want to have it in your business. And you can also check out Kelly Wagner on the Being Curious show, and you can find out more at edgemagazine.net. And today we are here with Tracy Doyle, and she is a national recognized entrepreneur, author, and emotional wellness advocate whose life's work bridges the worlds of business, success, and personal transformation. After building a multi-million-dollar medical communications company and earning regional accolades like the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award, Tracy faced a breaking point. Emotional burnout. This personal crisis became the catalyst for her transformation and the creation of the Aurora Method. And I'm definitely looking forward to getting into this. She is also the author of Life Storms, Finding Your Clear Sky. Tracy helps high achieving professional women overcome burnout, reshape limiting beliefs, and reconnect to themselves and others so that they can lead with calm, clarity, and confidence. Through her book, masterclasses, and 8-week course, Tracy empowers women to break free from the patterns keeping them stuck so they can lead their lives with calm, clarity, and confidence, reminding them that no matter how turbulent life feels, clear skies are always within reach. So you can uncover more of the hidden drivers of emotional burnout. Tracy also has a 90-minute free webinar, and you can check out more on that. There'll be links below, and that will be at Tracy Doyle Life/burnout webinar option, and that's down below. She is also on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and remember, she has her Aurora Method Academy, an 8-week course to help participants complete and apply the Aurora methods to their lives, and the Life Storms, Finding Your Clear Sky. And you can check out her website, and I'm going to spell it for those who are listening, is tracydoyle.life. It's TracyDoyle.life. And I can't wait for you to check out more about Tracy and everything she has to offer. And Tracy, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to have you here. And I've got to ask, how did you get started and what was your breaking point to do the catalyst for the change in your life?
Oh, well, first, Angela, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I just am so honored to be here today. Burnout for me is a signal, right? And it was something that, when you think about burnout, it starts out feeling like stress, then you start to feel overwhelmed, and you're getting signals all along the way. But most of us with burnout, we ignore it. And then the next thing that starts to happen is it feels like you're at odds with everyone and everything, and no one gets you. No one understands you. You're in conflict. And then what starts to happen is we either implode on the inside or we start to explode on the outside where we're snapping and we're frustrated. I grew up believing that I had to sacrifice myself for my family. I came from a mom who had me, as a teenager. She was mentally ill, and back then, they didn't know what mental illness was. And so, my mom just struggled with, sort of doing two things, parenting and working and trying to be independent. And so it was very difficult. And sadly, she made some bad choices with that. So at a young age, I grew up believing I had to sacrifice myself for my job. I'm sorry, for my
Mm.
family, for my job, and ultimately for my relationship. And that sacrifice, because I assumed a caretaker role at a young age for my mom and for my siblings, that really just led me to this place where this is the breaking point now. I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was December 21st. It was 1999.
Well,
I was, a senior director at work at this point. I hadn't started my business yet. I was responsible for my mom because my grandmother, when I was 25, said, like, you need to take care of your mom now, not me anymore. And
wow.
then I was responsible for my sister's kids because my sister had the same disability as my mom, and she was beginning to have children. So all of this stuff started to pile on. So that's where the overwhelm started to happen. But meanwhile, I'm a high achiever, right? Because as a person being the first in my family to go to school, um, and I saw my respite being school, getting away from all the chaos at home because there's many complexities there. I'm big job, big responsibility, and here I am getting ready for work, and I get a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and
Mm.
my eyes are hollow, my spirit's dim, and I didn't even recognize myself because I just looked so empty and depleted, you know. And inside my head, I'm the argument starts, like I start, that resentment starts to build, right? And I'm fighting
Mm.
with myself, and
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm done, and I'm getting all worked up, I'm done taking care of my mentally ill mom, and it's getting louder and louder. I'm done being responsible for my sister's kids. I'm done being stretched in every single direction at work. I'm done being
Yeah.
the fixer. The diatribe is happening, and then it's like, I'm done fighting with everyone and everything. I'm done. And, inside my head, it was like, if I got good and drunk, maybe I'd crash the car,
Yeah.
And if I crashed the car, no one would know that I did it on purpose because I was the woman who managed it all for everybody. And I didn't want anyone to know I couldn't handle it, And so later that night, I was jolted awake by someone knocking on my car window, and I'm hearing, "Are you okay? Are you okay?"
Mhm.
I had gone through with it. And my I look, and my car is facing oncoming traffic. I'm a hair away from a head-on collision with a young
Wow.
couple in an SUV. In fact, it was the husband knocking on my window because he thought I was dead. Um, and in that moment, you know, and like, burnout takes you to substance use, it takes you to drug use, it takes you to, to drinking, to drugging, to medication, and abusing medication. It takes you to suicidal ideation. And in that moment, it was like, what have I done? And how did I get so lost?
Yeah.
And then it was like, how do I get my life back? And that next day, you know, when I realized what I could have done, the shame. And I'm walking to a school meeting, for my niece, and I'm walking and I'm crying and I'm screaming out to God. And I'm like, I just couldn't believe what I could have done. And finally I just yell out, I want to live, I want to live again. And then all of a sudden, my first real lesson came there, which was
Mm.
that sacrificing myself did not mean abandoning myself, right? It meant putting myself first while I was managing it all. And that was the first realization. And for me at that time, it meant getting help. And I went, I had to get support. So I go to therapy, I get treated for depression, all the various things that they do for burnout. But here's the thing, the number one thing they say people with burnout need is to change their outlook. And in the middle of
Mm.
all of that, I'm like, how? How do you do that? So when I was on antidepressants and I'm going to therapy weekly, they were working individually for me, and basically here I am, things are getting better. But then I start my business a couple of years later, and now it comes back, right? And basically one of the things I've learned is that, vulnerability doesn't mean weakness. So I finally have the courage to open up to one friend, and this one friend of mine also experienced burnout, and she had learned a tool. And what felt like for me now over 10 years, because she had learned this tool that she had learned in a 12-step program. And she showed me, how my life experiences really affected me. And what I realized over the course of 10 years, reflecting on all the things that she showed me and all the conversations we had had, it wasn't my mom breaking me. It wasn't my job breaking me. It wasn't my family breaking me. It was me breaking me,
Yeah.
and I had always felt, because I was born as a teen pregnancy, that I never belonged. And I thought that if I gave 110%, and I did and did and did for everyone and everything, then maybe I would belong, I would belong. And when my friend showed me how that one belief, among others, really drove me to, you know, people pleasing, trying to prove my worth,
Mm.
sacrificing myself. That's when I saw that I could reshape what shaped me, and then once I started to reshape what shaped me, that's when I found my way back, to myself, to my life, to my voice, to the people in my life who matter. And that's when I realized, this is the transformation point, because I could change all the stuff that I thought I was living with and stuck with, when no, it was all in here, and all I had to do was learn how to turn that around. And that's really what began the pivot into the Aurora method.
That's something so interesting to hear, but also for other people to hear, to understand that when things start taking you down, it can take you down very, very deep.
Yeah,
And everybody can move themselves out of it when you want to, when you're ready to, when something does a catalyst to change that. Like you had the catalyst where you decided, I did want to live. I did want to move forward. And that's something, and it's there's so much to unpack with everything you said. So we're going to go back a little bit to getting to the point of where you're taking care of everybody and everything in your life. And I'm just going to say this is not a sexist thing, but I'm just going to say a lot of women take on that role of the caregiver, taking care of people, keeping the family together, doing that. And it's not that men don't, they absolutely do. And there's a lot that are taking on those roles now. But there's a lot of women that take it on, that have been, I think, taking it on to a deeper extent. And this is something, as you've been doing that, and I think you were put in an extreme case of really taking on a lot and having to manage all of that. And there's my team is just so for those of you who don't know, I work with a team in a non-physical, and they're also coming in and just saying that there's also a lot of people right now that are in this I forget what the actual name of it, but it's they're going the compressed, they're calling it the compressed generation, because a lot of people are taking care of children or young adults in their life, and they're also taking care of aging parents or aging people around them. So they're kind of compressed in the middle, and you're really getting sandwiched between two
exactly.
different generations and your own. And that sounds like that's something you yourself were stuck in a big, big way. And what happened with that whole situation as you started taking care of yourself? How did that, were you able to find a peace, a calm, to be able to have it a more healthy, balanced relationship? How did you change that relationship?
Yeah, and that's the part that takes time, and it took work, right? Because
Yes.
what I've learned is that, and I call this the reaction cascade. So, and I find
Right.
that with my work with women, I'm finding it's amazing that, and first I'll say this, what I find absolutely amazing is I had trauma in my life and I had, unusual family dynamic circumstances, having a mentally ill mom. And yet I've worked with women who've just had a critical parent, or who had a parent that they felt didn't support them, or who were made fun of, at school for their smile, right? It
Right.
takes us to the same limiting beliefs that
Yes.
I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy. I find that fascinating. But
Yes.
the thing that I learned, and this is where I find that this is what's really helped me, and I'll share where it took me next. But my friend taught me that the word resentment means to refeel deeply. It comes from the French word ressentir, which means to refeel deeply. So the underlying truth is that we're all wounded. We all have
Yeah.
experiences that we internalize. And when that, and I always put it out here, when that wound
Yeah.
happens, we create a belief. So for my situation with my family, it was I have to do everything,
Yeah.
right? I have to do everything. If I don't, no one can do it, right?
Yeah.
That was one belief. Then I had another one because my mom didn't know how to nourish, right? So it's not that she didn't love me, she just didn't know how to express it, right? Now when you're young, you don't understand this, right? So, and you always hear in therapy, like, I forget the cliche, but they're doing the best they can with what they have. Well, when
Right.
you're in burnout and you're that person who's the caregiver stuck in the sandwich, you're like, I don't want to hear that. I want them to understand me. So the other belief I had was nobody cares, right?
Yeah.
Anytime anyone said or did anything that reawakened that little that or where I refelt that wound and it reawakened that belief, I learned that I was driven by it because it was in my unconscious mind, right? So as I slowly realized that that would drive me to, I'm not good enough, right? No, nobody cares. I'm not good enough, or I have to do everything myself or it won't happen. I'm not worthy of having time for myself. That's where it would go. Then I always point to my feet. What happened next? I'd feel fear, right? Fear would
Mhm.
grip me. And I love Tony Robbins' work. He talks in very simply three fears. What am I afraid of losing? What am I afraid of never getting? What am I afraid of being less than or getting less than I desire? So it's lost less and never.
Yeah.
When that would happen, it was like a tsunami that would come in. And I call this the city of limitation. You can see I'm in between my two ears, right? Because then the
Yes.
city of limitation starts. And so on the one hand, if I would refeel something, I might get I might become self-seeking. So
Mm.
I like this idea of self-centered thinking as the city of limitation, because self-seeking means I want to get validation. I'm going to keep doing it until I do it. So I'm going to people please until you finally tell me I'm good enough. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so with my mother, I would just keep doing and doing and doing, but yet nobody cares. You know what I mean? And then when nobody cared, when that would happen, I would get to this other place where, I'd get angry, and I'd get real self-righteous inside and, and just, or I'd become very self-avoidant, right?
Yes.
And when I was self-avoidant, it was like, I'm pulling away and I'm not talking to you and I'm not doing anything for you. And I'm not, how healthy is that? That's not healthy, right?
But it's a
So
survival mechanism in the
it
moment.
is, but a lot of us do it. No
Yes.
matter how severe the wounds are, we go to this place and we all have different traits. And so the Aurora method helps us name those traits, right? Because when we see them, we can name them. When we name them, we can change them. So when I started to see this, and I realized that if I'm stuck inside the city of limitation, I can't get out, but you can't get in, right? So
Yeah.
I
Very
was
good.
creating a dynamic that I couldn't see, and I was creating the conflicts, and I was creating the isolation and the disconnection that I felt. And so what ultimately happened was, as I started to see the impact of these life experiences that shaped me and the beliefs that they created, and then the traits, the fears when they were
Mm.
triggered, what it did to this with me being stuck in the city, I was like, oh no, like I can change that. I can rewrite that narrative. Right. And then it was like what felt impossible became possible. And I was like,
Mm.
okay, joy is possible, peace is possible, happiness is possible, but how do I get there? So
Yeah.
what I learned was when I recognize the trait, so let's say I'm in the midst of being with my mom and and I'm in the self-seeking space, it's a matter of recognizing I'm releasing self-seeking and I'm breathing in, I'm enough, and I'm affirming, I'm enough, I'm enough, right? When I was in the self-avoidance space where I didn't want to talk to my mother anymore, I'm releasing the self-avoidance and I'm present and I'm open and receptive and willing to be present and I'm present and I'm staying. And I had to learn how to reset and shift. Doesn't mean I'm not creating a boundary and taking my mental breaks and
Right.
my mental space, but I'm not going to create an environment that keeps that conflict alive. So what you get when you learn how to reset these things is connection, right? Because
Mm.
you get your connected to yourself because you know what you need and you're able
Yes.
to mean what you say and say what you mean and and just express yourself. So I was able to set limits with my mom, and my mom was bipolar. Sometimes she would rage out. I used to get angry with her, but when I finally accepted, like, that's her
Yeah.
illness, that's not me, right? So I had to disconnect from it, and then when she was done, say, are you done? And then express what I needed to say, right? And then I learned how to navigate that one conversation. But that's not to say I didn't know how to navigate it. It spilled over to other conversations. Like if I remember a conversation with my boss before I started my business, before my breaking point, I'm crying and crying and I need help, I need help. And he said to me, Tracy, you give 110% to everything. When you can change that, then you'll get help. And I had no idea what he meant.
Mm.
Right? But then I realized I was self-reliant because I grew up believing I had to do everything myself. So here I am stuck in the city of limitation of self-reliance, which said to the outside world, I don't need you. I don't trust you. And so then no one wanted to help me because I wasn't accepting it. So then I had to release self-reliance and make myself open and receptive to asking for and accepting help. And it's pretty amazing. And then all of a sudden I got the help I needed and the support I needed because I finally opened my heart to accepting and receiving. So what I found was when I'm stuck in the city of limitation, I'm looking at life through a straw and I'm just focused on what I don't have, right? When I put the straw down and I see all the things I do have, if I'm the one willing to shift that self-centered thinking and that fear that drives it, which starts all from that initial belief, man, can life change. And it did.
Mm.
It did significantly for me.
That's something, when you said when you finally saw that you were taking everything on and you were able to accept and receive,
Hmm.
that's I that is, people say, well, that should be a simple thing. It's not a simple
Yeah.
thing. It's not a simple thing. And
No.
to and that I feel also went with as you built your own self-worth. Is that where your self-worth and your worthiness also went into the ability to receive and accept help and information and accept people to come into your life and be there for you?
Yes. And one of the things I've learned, there's a book called, I can't remember the author's name, but it's called 52 Esteemable Acts. And the idea is when you do an esteemable thing, you build your own esteem. And what
Mm.
I found was so one of the esteemable acts I did for my mom was I realized when I became self-avoidant, it was almost punishing her, because she couldn't understand why I just would disappear for 3 weeks and I wouldn't talk to her for a month,
Right.
or I would not talk to her for 6 months. Because I'm like, I'll show you, which is self-importance, right? And which is another limiting thing, right? It's another
Right.
self-centered trait. When I actually acknowledge that, so in my book, in the Aurora Method, we talk through self-assessment, then how to turn our thinking around, which I just showed you. Then we then go into like, how do you mend, and how do you build bridges back to people? I
Mm.
finally saw my mom's limits, right? And what I
Yeah.
recognized was I didn't accept her limits. But when I saw how my self-avoidance was hurtful, I said to her, Mom, I realized, I was thinking about our relationship and I realized anytime you yelled at me, and I went on to tell her what was happening. And of course, she yelled at me right then and there.
Right.
And I waited. And I said, just hear me out. I realized anytime you yelled, I would punish you by disappearing. And I realized how unfair that was. And what I want you to know is I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do the best that I can to stay, right? And not leave you. And that she cried, we hugged, we had a weekly call every week. And I had a one-way relationship with my mentally ill mom, and I was with her the day she died, right? But leading up to that, when I got to the breaking point, I was so fed up with, I wouldn't accept it. I was so stuck in self-reliance. I was so like, just, when you think of the sandwich, right? Why me? Why me? Right? Why? The answer is, why is a letter in the alphabet? How? How do I take care of myself while I'm managing this? What do I need to do? How and what became my two big words, because why
Right.
kept me stuck in the city of limitation. And once I saw how to change and then how to mend and build a bridge back to what they are capable of giving, in that case, my mom, and to others in my life that have been so desperately wanting to help me, that I wouldn't let in. Like I said, I got joy and fulfillment back. Happiness is possible, peace is possible, joy is possible. And that's, for me, what was huge. I got fulfillment.
And I think that's something for people to hear, that there can be joy, there can be peace, there can be fulfillment, no matter what you came from. And I like how you kind of changed things around and started looking at not the why, but how you can handle it from there. What can you do? How can you change it? Because a lot of times, and I'm getting a little niggle from my team too. They're saying there are a lot of times all of you have very challenging people or situations in your life. And when you're looking at it, why did I bring this in? Instead of
Hmm.
going, how can I handle it? It
Hmm.
changes the whole dynamic. And you have, and to realize when you have people in your life that are challenging, a lot of times they don't even know they're that challenging. They have no idea what they're doing, but you're taking on all that emotion and you're helping people so much by having this in the book and having all this information there and talking and speaking about what you went through to show you can come out the other side and be happy and be joyful and have see the sun again. And they're just it's just like the brightness on you, and they're just saying the brightness. A lot of people don't see that, and when you start going down that rabbit hole of self-pity a lot of times
Hmm.
because like what did I do to deserve this life?
Exactly. I was so stuck in self-pity. And, and it kept me, I mean, to me, that self-pity is what took me to the breaking point,
Yeah.
because it was poor me, poor me, poor me, rather than just looking at, when I look at my life, like, okay, where am I here? What was my purpose? And when I really got real deep with myself, which was, I could have died. And where would they have been without me? Like I always go back in my book, I write, I love, oldies, so, It's a Wonderful Life is always it's an oldie and a
Love
goodie at
that one.
Christmas. But I love that movie because, the lesson that I reflected on was when he saw what the people in his life looked like without him, and he was also at that breaking point himself of feeling like he sacrificed himself for his family, and he wasn't ever going to get whatever he wanted, and that's how I felt, right? It was
Yeah.
that self-pity. But when I finally realized that that I was spared, essentially, I still to this day don't know how I survived that. And so when I looked at it as I was given the gift of life if I wanted it, and if I wanted to keep it, I had to get out of that, out of the city of limitation. And when I look, and I would, of course, at the time, I'm like, I don't know how, because I was just focused on all the, my life is horrible, and if you had my life, you would be like me too. And no, my life, yes, my life was challenging. I had challenges. I had difficult and complex situations, but I was equipped to deal with it if I leaned into it, right? And then when I finally leaned into it, that's when the opportunity opened itself for me to start a business. And then the reward that came was amazing. I always wanted to see the world, and all of a sudden I saw the world because I owned a business, and it afforded me the opportunity to travel across the world with our clients. And
Mhm.
and I still pinch myself and say, wow, once I released myself from that city of limitation and I opened myself up, look what is there for me to do. And so, I look now at my life as service. Who was I chosen to serve, without that feeling of self-pity and anger, without that. And so that's sort of how I process the world today.
I love that. And it's really moving yourself out of that because there's a lot of situations people are in that anybody would look at it and go, yeah, you deserve to have self-pity for yourself, There and it really, and I'm want to say a little bit here, it really doesn't serve the people to be pitying on people because it kind of creates that whole energy of not having an option to move out, not saying you have choices because like you didn't think you had a choice. You had to do it your own self. You had to do this. And then starting to realize you do have choices on how you do it. That's huge.
It's
That's
huge.
huge.
It is so huge. And that's the thing. That's why I call it the city of limitation. Because, we hold ourselves back, but we think it's I always talk about this when I talk about burnout. We think it's a them problem or it's an us problem. So, but when we get to that place of, is it possible that it's not them and it's not us, meaning my husband or my wife? It's not that, but it could be a me problem. To me, when I finally got to the place of it, could it be coming from me? And of course, I didn't want it to be coming from me because I didn't want to be accountable to it. But
Right.
once I became accountable to how my beliefs were driving me to this place, to the point of near death, right? It's where it took me, you know, and staying stuck in negative, and then I started
Yeah.
to realize, I'm like, there's experiences that created positive beliefs and there's experiences that created negative beliefs. How do I
Yes.
move from negative to positive? And that's when I realized, that's why now it's like with the Aurora method, what we do is I have a tool called, we do the self-assessment, as I said, then we do an exercise. It's a series of them called the turnaround. But then we build what I call the life storm navigator, which is how do we think and do the opposite? Right?
Yes.
And then we start to practice manifesting change. And then once we get pretty comfortable with that, we start moving into mending and building those bridges back. And but then when you're done with it, a lot of people think, okay, check, check, and check, I'm done. And what I've realized is our beliefs are internalized. We're
Yeah.
hardwired. So with practice, we can rewire, right? And so that's where, the Aurora method teaches us what daily practice looks like. And it's, 5, 10 minutes every night and every morning. It's amazing.
I love that. And I love the fact that, you brought up the fact of what if the problem is me? I was like, if there's a lot of chaos going around you, what if you're the common denominator to it and taking responsibility for that? But I've got to say, I was in some of the same spaces where then I had to look at, I'm the common denominator. I'm the one that has to change. But then I just want to ask you a little bit because I went through where I started feeling like, man, I'm the happiest I've ever been. I'm feeling so much joy. This is great. It's great to love life again. But then I had some moments in there of like, why didn't I change it earlier? I could have had a lot happier life a lot earlier. Did you go through that
I
also?
did, I did, I did. And I wished I had known then, what I know now, because and honestly, that's what motivated me to write my book. I was
Oh,
in the process of, there's a few things there. I was in the process of selling my business and I'm like, what do I do next? Because I had made a decision I wanted to exit. I didn't know how. So,
right.
of course, when you go through that process and you look at what skills you have and what you don't, I ultimately sort of handed the reins over to someone who knew how. But then, as over the years, when I had gone through my burnout experience, I started mentoring other professional women. I was in the pharmaceutical industry, so there's a lot of burnout there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so just various executives and different people. And so when I was talking to some of my mentees, because they've become dear friends, they're like, "Oh, you have to write a book." And I'm like, "Write a book?" And I'm like, "No, what am I going to write about?" Well, what ended up happening was in 2021, my sister, I didn't fully understand, nor did I appreciate how much more disabled she was from my mom.
Oh,
And basically her daughter was assuming the role I had assumed when I was 10, and she had assumed it when she was 11. Now
mm,
she's soon to be 14, saying to me, "I'm going into high school and I can't succeed if I don't have help with my mom." And I'm like, "What?" And so she had the courage to tell me, which is amazing. I
wow.
wished I had that courage when I was younger. So I uprooted my life in New Jersey and I moved down to where they were because I wanted her to stay with her mom. And so she stays with her mom, her because her other two siblings are in their 30s. One has his own family, the other one
Wow.
is sadly a drug addict. And so, all she had was me. And so, my partner and I talked about it. I'd be there for 3 weeks, I'd come home for a week. So now I'm down there and I'm isolated, because I don't
Mm,
know anybody. I'm in a different state, I'm starting over basically. And then the triggers start happening again, I
yes.
could feel it because my sister, triggers me. The wounds were similar
Yeah.
that like my mom that I had with my mom. And now I'm like, oh girl, no, you cannot go back. And I could feel it happening. And so meanwhile, my mentees are like, write a book, write a book. And then I thought, you know what? I'm in this place and I can pour my heart out into this and I can
Mm,
show others what I wished I had known then because I realized I just didn't know how. And so my
yeah.
whole journey was a journey of learning how to change, what to change, and how to become the person I've become, you know. And so that's why I poured my heart out into it, you know. So
And that's something I think for people to hear. Like you said, you figure you're kind of through a lot of it, and then you start seeing the triggers again. And I've got to say, especially with family, there's different triggers, and it spills over into
it
work
does.
with bosses, with partners, with relationships, and there'll be triggers that the people aren't even knowing they're creating a trigger with you, but you're triggered by it because you're still working through it. And I love how you went down there and saw that you were being triggered. And where
Mhm.
did you start writing the book when you were down there?
I did.
Did you?
I actually, if someone wanted me to take a picture of where I did it, I was in my bedroom in a chair. I brought the chair home here. And
Yes.
or I was out on I built a sun porch because I just needed the sun and I
Yes.
needed an environment and I just sat out there and I had flowers and I'm just sitting there and it was pouring out of my fingers. I was just writing it. It just poured out. It was an amazing experience to do, you know, when I
And
gave
to,
myself permission to
yes.
let it happen, you know.
And that's something when you give yourself permission, because a lot of times we don't give ourselves permission. We're still, even though there's things that may feel, and you work with a lot of, different professionals, different women, when it's feeling like this is what they want, but they also feel they don't think they can do it because there's all the criteria that's holding them back, that they feel is holding them back, all of the obligations. How do you take somebody through, like figuring out, do you have them go through to figure out what are obligations you actually need to be or to do, or are there ways to work through those obligations differently?
Yeah, so two things. First is I want to address what you said before about we think people are triggering us because what I've
Yeah.
learned is that it's our refeel and everyone has their own refeel. So when you're bouncing off people, it's you're refeeling yours and they're refeeling theirs, and that's the conflict, right? I just wanted as you were talking, I
I
thought about
love that.
but in terms of how do I help people? So one of the things I've learned is when you're burned out, when you feel like you have to do more work, you're like, I can't. I just don't have the capacity. So the Aurora Method Academy, I've actually extended it to 12 weeks. I realized I didn't update you.
Oh, nice.
The reason I extended it is because the work, people doing it before having a homework assignment, it felt too much. right? So
Yeah.
what we do, the Aurora Method Academy is now your space. That's what it's about. It's having 90 minutes to you. And and yes, there's some teaching in there. And then I show them how to do the work, and they have quiet time to do the work, and they start to get in touch with stuff. Now, from there, once they get their own ahas, there's a couple things that can happen there. Some people they're DIYers. They get their insights, they're following it, they're practicing it, and they love it. Other people need more support um,
Right.
because they need to process it. I was that type of person. It almost felt like when I think of my city of limitation, I always describe it as my head was covered in bricks and then concrete and then wood and then
Yeah.
more concrete and more bricks. I just couldn't break through on my own, and I needed guidance. And I
Yeah.
had a lot of help, but my one friend became like my life storm buddy. Like she just, I would talk to her about such deep and meaningful things because I finally was willing to be vulnerable. So that's really where coaching comes in. If
Yes.
people need it, and so that's sort of how I help them see it. Now, what I help them see though, as I'm working with someone, if they feel overcommitted and over obligated, it's really looking. There's one person who comes to mind who I've coached recently. She's an executive
Mhm.
for a global pharma company. And that was her whole thing. I'm overcommitted, I'm overcommitted, I'm overcommitted. But when we did the work, what we saw was one of her beliefs that if she didn't do it, it wouldn't get done. And she
Yes.
was overcommitting herself to prove her worth. And so once we saw that, we saw how not that she had to disengage and not commit, but learn to say no and understand that no is a complete sentence and that you're not a failure if you're saying no. Uh,
I like that. No
right?
is a complete sentence.
Right.
I
And
like that.
finding your voice to say, I'd love to, I have an obligation that day. Because she
Yeah.
was someone who would like double book and,
Yes.
or put it so close that she was always running late. And it was so much stress. And then it would be like, I don't have time to do any work because she wouldn't give herself space. There was no space, right? So when we're avoiding ourselves, we don't give ourselves space. That's what happens. So it was really just helping her unpack and give her some space. And where she's at now is in a completely different place, you
Love
know?
it. And I've got to add, I love that. Absolutely love that because I mean, a lot of us, we get overwhelmed and we don't even know where to start and how to work ourselves through that. And I love that you have the Aurora Academy to do that. But how did you get the name Aurora? Where did that come from?
So this is a great story. So, for me, the Aurora method was 8 practices that I had learned in isolation because, I wanted to overcome the burnout. And the main thing I wanted to overcome was the conflicts in my reactions because I would have these really explosive reactions that caused me a lot of shame. So, like in therapy, I learned this, in self-help books, I learned that. And then I would do body work. I did all sorts of even metaphysical work. I was like, please, I don't want to do this. But then what I started to realize was I just needed a framework. So I started building these practices, right? So I had these 8 practices. The one being the most pivotal, the one my friend showed me, it started with the self-assessment. But I was always able to go back to that to say, who hurt me? Who am I angry with? How did it affect me? What did I do? And I was able to really look at myself from that. And then from there, it's like, okay, how do I turn it around? And so I started building these tools, but they were tools in my head and they
Right.
were just practices. So then I started, helping people, and then I started documenting them as tools. And I still called them the 8 practices. I just called it the C180, how to turn around, how to turn yourself around.
Like it.
But then as I started to write the book, people were like, but there are different phases of what you do, because I was
Yes.
working with different editors. They were pretty amazing. And they're like, you have to name it something. And I was like, what? Like I have to name it something? So then I meditated on it and what it's about. When I think about what it means you can start over at any point in your life. So then I look up, I wrote in what it was and I literally went into chat GBT
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and I typed in what it was, like what are words that represent it. So different words came up and then the word Aurora came up. And I was like, Aurora, like Aurora is the goddess of dawn in Greek
Mm.
mythology. And so it means a new beginning and a new day. And I'm like, I love that. So the Aurora method is all about no matter where you are in life, you can have a new beginning. And once you learn the practices, you can have a new beginning in your day. Because let's face it, we all have churn. Someone, we get triggered, they're unconscious, right?
Right.
We're never going to be perfect. We're human. But when it starts, or if we react in a way that embarrasses us, or if we're starting to implode on the inside, we have the practices to go back to, and we can reset that and start it over. And that's why it's called the Aurora Method.
I love that. That's a beautiful story. I love the meaning behind it and knowing because you hear and I'm just going to say people as they get older like, "Oh, I don't have enough time to change," or "There's no way I can change who I am. There's no way I could be happy again because I'm too old for it." And
Mm,
I love the fact that every day is new. There's no time limit on
mm, mm,
change. There's
mm, mm,
no time limit, and there's no time limit on any of us. And I
mm,
love
mm.
how that's how you brought it out with your book and with your the Aurora Method Academy, and just bringing that out to. I just keep hearing hope to give people hope
Mhm,
that you
mhm,
can change and change is there and it's all accessible and it doesn't. One of the things, and I'm just going to share a lot of times when I'm working with people is they feel if it's taken me 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years to get to this point, that means it's going to take me the same amount of time to get beyond it. And I
mm.
think you're showing people that it's not. It can
No,
happen so quickly, so quickly.
change is possible. Change is possible. And that's the thing I think so many people get stuck with. Well, as I said before, this is my life. That is self-pity. Right?
Yeah,
That's all that is. And when you recognize what I call the self-centered traits and the traits that keep you stuck and how you can learn how to reset those negative thoughts, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I forget the number, but it's something like I forget there was a statistic like 90% of our thoughts are negative. You know what I
yes.
mean? And so that's a job,
Yeah.
basically, when you think about it. It's a daily job. Like you have to
Yeah.
pay attention. And for me, when we're vigilant to it, yes, we go along our merry way and things are good and things are good. But when things start to happen and we get irritated, to me, burnout is you get frustrated, you get irritated, and then towards the end, you're numb and then you get exhausted. But when you're living in the frustration and the irritation, you can change that, you
Yeah.
know?
And what with everything you're doing, I know it's making a huge impact with people. And like I'm gonna encourage people to go check out her website, the Aurora Method Academy, and the book Life Storms, Finding Your Clear Sky, because there is so much information to help people move through this. Because what happens if, I mean, I'm just saying, think of this, what if we change from going from 90% of negative thoughts to ourselves maybe going to 50 or 40 or 20. And what if by us doing that, we can change with the next generation so they may only have 10% negative thoughts, hopefully none at some point. But the change starts with all of us, with everything you're doing. You're helping people change those negative thoughts and bring them back to the positive. And I hate to say negative and positive, but deformating thoughts. It's
Yes,
really thoughts that take us down, deformating
yes,
thoughts
yes.
to then being kind and to yourself. How beautiful is
And
that?
to others as well. The
Yeah,
kindness that comes, because the one thing I've learned is when you start to change, right? And you're changing that dynamic inside. So to me, change comes from within. But what's happening on the outside is you start to think they're changing, but they're not. They're just responding differently to you. So we're responsible for changing those dynamics. And what I found is most people think it takes two to change, right?
right.
But in my experience, one person can create that ripple effect of change, and that's where the hope comes in because I've coached many women who they're like, it's never going to change,
Yeah.
and my boss is never going to change. My sister's never going, like, it's never going to get better. And, and that's just nothing but a never fear, right? So,
Right.
and then as you start to
Never be.
unpack that, and it's what I do. I help them unpack those because that's another negative thought. It's driven by fear, right? So it's an ever fear. So once we work through that, it's like, okay, well, what can we do? And each person's different. Each
Right.
person has their own unique thing. And that's the one thing I do want to emphasize, because the Aurora method is really a personal journey, and it's a personalized mindfulness practice and program for you, right? It's not do what I say, right? And I know, and that for me, that was another thing. Like, as I was working through it early in, I would take affirmations that people would give me, but they didn't resonate with me.
Right.
I mean, it's, because it's like, you don't have my life. So
Right.
they would feel like, they would like just roll off, like, like a, like Teflon, like
Yeah.
when you put something in a nonstick pan, like it would just roll off me. But when I learned things like a never fear, where I'd say I'm releasing fear, and, and I'm receiving calm, I'm centered, and I'd affirm I'm centered and I'm calm and all is well. That worked because that's
Yeah.
what I needed in that moment. You know what I mean? And I have all different ones now. Like now
Right.
they happen as they're happening. And because I've adopted it so much into my life that I'm constantly doing it. And
Yeah.
so to your point, I do get stuck in negativity at times, but gosh, it was daily before. And, now I can, it might be a few times a month. Wow, that is amazing. You know,
That's huge. And you're moving yourself out of it quickly because you can now recognize it. You have the tools to be able to release it to move forward. And that's the
exactly.
biggest thing. So many people feel like, well, I'm just going back because I'm hearing so many people feel they have to carry everything themselves. So they
Yes.
don't want to use any tools because they should be able to figure it out themselves. Because a lot of people, they're very smart people and that's part of the other thing. They maybe are very smart people. A lot of times those smart people have been told that they're not smart to try to keep them under control, but also, and by others in the family and around them. But to know that inside they're thinking, I'm smart, I should be able to figure this out their own myself. As the 110, you give 110%. You think you can do it yourself. But to know when you start letting yourself go, okay, I can let people in. Other people might have tools to help me. That's the key to healing, the key to moving forward, the key to all of us working together. So important.
That is my experience. When I let others guide me and show me and share their wisdom with me, so much was possible.
Yeah.
And that's why the way I structured the book, it's a guide, really. And the way I storytell in it is I'm just, I'm bearing my soul in there so people can see how my life experiences shape me, not to get into a diatribe about some of the trauma I experienced, but to show when I get into the work, to show how it affected me. How did I respond to it? What did I do? And how it replayed in my life. And I couldn't even see it. Right. And then how it held me back. And I'm thinking, well, that this happened. That's why I call it jading. I always wear jade bracelet to remind
Oh,
myself. But jading is it's always justifying why I did what I did, or justifying why it
oh,
was the way it was, and arguing with you in terms of why what I did was the right thing anyway, and defending my choices, which were bad,
yeah.
and then explaining. I would always explain myself, and that didn't bring change. That did not bring change. And what brought change was really seeing what I could do, and how I could release things. And then as I did, like I said, I started to change myself, and I started to see the dynamics of my relationships change.
And that, that's the other part of this is it's seeing yourself differently
Hmm.
from who you were before. And sometimes that can take you down a path that might be a little hard to handle. And I love the fact that with you in the book and the Aurora Method Academy, you're able to help people who are ready for the change.
Yes.
You're, you're there to be the tool to help them through that. And it sounds like an amazing process. How
It,
does the
it is.
Aurora Method Academy work? Is this like an online Zoom? Is it individual? Is it a downloadable? How does that
So,
work?
so it's a group program. The reason is because so many of us are so isolated
Mm,
that I want to bring us together, and so that we can at least, what I always encourage is at the end is to pick a life storm buddy, right? So someone who's you're keeping yourself accountable to. How am I doing with the self-centered traits? How did my day go? How did I handle it? Not to get together and just vomit all the negative, right?
right.
It's all about how am I shifting to the positive, right? So
Huge.
the way the academy works is it's a workshop style course. So it's a series of workshop exercises. I take them through the method. As I said, I had to extend it because at first I was teaching it, and what I found was people were overwhelmed on the outside. So I wanted to give them that sacred space to have quiet time on the inside, inside the academy. So the way it works is we meet weekly for 12 weeks. We have our various exercises that we do. There's active group coaching, there's small groups. At the completion of it, I encourage each person to identify someone, to get a life storm buddy. But beyond that, what we're offering is Aurora Circles, which really is a weekly accountability group. How did we do? What were our wins? What were our challenges so that we can keep talking about how to manifest these changes? Because change doesn't happen overnight. And by the
Right.
time they're done with the 12 weeks, they've likely mended 1 to 2 relationships. But if you want to keep what you have, you got to practice it. So either work with a buddy, right? So you're practicing it, and that's outside of the group, or come into the group so that you can stay accountable. And so, it's like I said, there's a DIY component afterwards. But if there's an additional support needed, there's additional support needed. So it's done in a group coaching capacity. For anyone who is, some people, given their positions and things like that, they're afraid to be vulnerable.
Right.
I understand that and I respect it, especially given I was in the pharmaceutical industry and I worked with physicians.
Yes.
I even in global executives, and they were terrified, really, for people knowing, given their stature and their prominence, what others might say about them. There was a fear element. So, and I respect that because it's real. And so,
Yes.
so for those folks, I do offer the same academy. It's the same program, but we do it one-on-one
Right.
weekly,
And
you know, but
that's
it's a higher cost.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But that's good to know because there are people who really don't want to, like you said, anonymity to keep that off to the side is a good thing.
Yeah.
So absolutely. And that's really good for people to know. And then your book, so your book is now it's out on Amazon and Kindle and is also on your website, correct? Or there's a
So
link to it to your website.
yeah, so it's on Amazon. They can get it in ebook. I just released an
I was to
audio book.
say ebook. I was wondering if you had an audio.
Yeah, the audio I did because so many people are just too busy to read, so they can hear it. They're guided to where to get the tools, and certain chapters they will need to print out because
Right.
to make sense of some of the things I'm talking about, they might not be able to track with it, in terms of completing the exercises. Um, and then of course it's hardcover and paperback, and then yes, on my website I do have a link as well. But I encourage everyone just go to Amazon. It's just
It's
easier.
just easier.
You'll get it in a day. So,
It's so quick. You don't have to worry
yeah,
about it.
exactly. Yeah, I just put it there because there are people, former clients of mine that were outside of the United States, and they're like, I can't get it. So I had to put it on my website so they could get it.
That is true. I'm glad you're taking care of those out of the
Yeah,
US.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I am having so much fun. I want to know, is there something you would like to bring up or cover before we close? I know I want to be cognizant of your time and what we're doing.
Yeah, all I want to say is if there's anyone out there struggling, just know that there is hope and there's a solution. There is a way through this, and sometimes life just feels so, as I said, impossible, but know that change is possible. and that it can happen. If the Aurora Method Academy sounds like something you're interested in, I'm currently in a cohort. So I haven't announced when the next one is available, but simply set up a one-on-one with me. Just go to my website. There's a button there that just says set up just a free consultation. Let's just talk, and see where you're at. And if there's a way that I can accelerate help, I'm here to do that.
I love that. I love that. And I keep hearing, I know we're kind of closing, but I got niggles from my team on the other side, and they just want to also kind of bring in a little bit more, maybe a little bit more in depth with when people are feeling that suicidal and those suicidal thoughts and bringing yourself coming out of there. And you had such an epiphany shortly after that really brought you through. And having the hope that people can move through it without having to take the drastic measures. And as you were going through that, it's a lot of times it's that feeling of you don't feel there's any other options.
Exactly.
And as you started feeling with the no other options, you also started and you went through with one of the options you had because you felt it was your only option. But then you didn't go away. You end up staying here.
Hmm.
And then you wanted to live right after that.
Hmm.
And it's the knowing we always have support around us all the time. And you have had so much support. And going into who you are and taking more time with knowing you have choices always. And that's everything's possible, like you said, to move yourself through. There's always that sun coming out the next day. My team's got kind of funny too, because they're saying, unless it's really cloudy.
Yeah, but when you get above a certain point on the clouds, the sun is there.
The sun is always there.
Yeah.
But it's knowing you can work through that, that there's always something when we're willing to go, I need help. I need to figure it out. And is that the point where you decided you couldn't do it on your own and you needed help?
Yes. And and what I'll say to anyone out there who's struggling, who has had any suicidal ideation, the most important thing is to get professional help immediately. I needed to be put on an antidepressant. I was depressed. I had, some significant trauma in my life that was never dealt with,
Right.
and so, that was first and foremost. I'm not on antidepressants anymore. I actually had two courses in my lifetime. The first one, it just wasn't long enough. And
Right.
then 2 years or 2 or 3 years later, I went on a second course, and then that's it. They had to just readjust my wiring on that level. But if anyone is thinking suicidally, it is so important to raise your hand and
Mhm.
let someone know. I mean, that's all it takes is letting one person in. And for me, I didn't, because I was, I thought there was no one, and the truth was that wasn't true. That was my self-centered thinking, keeping me trapped and stuck inside that city of limitation, telling me, no, no one cares. The truth is, so many people care, when you let them in and you let them know what's happening. So always, I'm a mental health and wellness advocate. Always get that right help first, and then know beyond that, if you can't afford therapy, there are other solutions, and so basically there are other ways to get the support that you need.
And that's something so important for people to hear. And I like how you said you think nobody cares, but you don't realize how much people really do care. And stepping into that, and that's sometimes hard to know that people do care about you because a lot of times you get into a space where you think nobody does.
Hmm.
But there's so many people around, and even people you'd never think would
Exactly.
care more
Exactly.
deeply than you'd ever imagine.
When I finally started talking about this, I really never talked about it. I kept it a big secret because I was so ashamed of it. So when I wrote the book is when I put it in there, and I couldn't even,
Mhm.
the editors wanted me to go in more depth, and I'm like, I gave enough, right? And now that I'm talking about it, it's gotten a lot easier to talk about. But, for me, it's like, when you finally let that out, because I was just so stuck with thinking like, no one's there. And then when I finally started to let it out and talk about it, so many people first who read it and other people in
Mhm.
my life now that they're hearing me talk about it on a podcast, they're like, I don't know what I would do if you weren't here,
Yeah.
and it's like, really? Like I mattered that much to you? I had no idea because I was so locked, drum tight in that city of limitation. So that's why I say when we can get past that city of limitation and recognize it, we can't get out of it and no one can get in it. It takes us to open that door, and and sort of break through it, like almost like chiseling out of an egg. you know?
And it takes brave people because it was brave for you to write your story, to put that out to the world, to talk about it on podcasts now. It takes someone brave to stand up and say, this is what's happening. This is what had been going on in my life. Someone brave to stand up and say, this is my story, and to take all of that because, I mean, even years ago, it was a lot more than it is now. If you mention anything about suicide or mental illness in a family or in a family, it would all be quieted down and nobody talked about it. But the true healing begins when people talk, when they bring it out into the open. So you can recognize the characteristics in the people around you and your own self to be able to work through a lot of the traumas people have endured themselves.
Exactly. And to me, it's like, with suicidal thoughts, it's really just that place where, because you don't know where else to go and you don't
Right.
think you have anywhere else to go. But the truth is you do if you let someone in. You know what I mean? And you talk about it, like to your point. And it just means trusting. For me, it was trusting one friend. I let her in. That's all it took. I mean, and I had so many friends around me. I was
Yeah.
from the outside, I looked great. Everyone thought I was super successful. I'm the woman who managed it all. I did it all. I was a top high achieving performer, big title, right? That's what I look like on the outside. I looked untouchable because I made myself untouchable, right? I wouldn't
Yeah.
let anyone in. But when I finally did, wow, what what a game changer, you know?
Absolutely. And I call it sometimes the shell of survival. You put this
Yeah,
shell up so you can
yeah,
survive and make yourself through. So it's learning not to criticize yourself for the shell you put up to survive to the point where you can start asking for help.
yep,
And
exactly.
it's huge. I just want to say thank you so much. You have lit up the world with all of your information, with sharing, with bringing that out. It's helping so many people on every level every day. I just keep hearing my team just wants you to know you're reaching people every day. People you never imagined are hearing it every day. You're making a difference. And
Oh.
so they show me pictures. I keep telling them, I wish you could take this picture and project it so everybody could see it. But what they're showing me is every time the book and the people you're reading, you're reaching, they're showing me all around the world light shining down and then those people lighting up. And it's just everywhere around the world being lit up because of your words and who you're reaching. So I want to thank you for all you've done to help so many people. It's
Thank
very
you.
much appreciated.
I appreciate it.
Well, Tracy, I want to say thank you so much for being on here. We've gone in a lot of different directions, but I think so well needed, and I appreciate you and all you bring to the world. And want to let
Thank you.
everybody know again, go to your website. It's tracydoyle.life. And those links will be down below. And then there also has the burnout webinar option to go on there to do the 90-minute free webinar. It's designed to help participants understand how internalized beliefs from unresolved life experiences affect how we think, how we feel, act, and contribute to burnout and relationship conflicts. I've got to say, this is so important right now because people just don't understand the triggers that are coming up for people everywhere. And we're tracing it back. And interesting, I keep hearing Your name is Tracy, and we're tracing it back. You've been tracing it back, so it's very,
That's
very
cool.
unique. But I want to thank you again. Thank you so much. And everybody, check out the Aurora Method Academy, Life Storms, Finding Your Clear Sky. Go to Amazon on that. And is there anything else you'd like to say just before we close, Tracy?
No, just thank you, thank you, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. And as I said, if anyone's struggling out there, just know that there's another way.
I
There's a
love it.
there's a solution.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Tracy, so much for sharing your knowledge, your time, your heart. And I also want to remind others to make sure to watch the next episodes of Edge Talk Radio. They are on the first and third Wednesdays of the month at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. If you've missed any past episodes, no worries. You can go to they're on downloadable podcasts. They're also available on my YouTube channel, Edge Magazine's YouTube channel. So you can go there to catch any of the past episodes. And I want to thank you all so much for listening, expanding, and amplifying our universe together. Thank you so much. Have an amazing